Hey guys, welcome to this video. If you're coming from my previous tutorial and if you've seen the preview, you got all those texts scattered all over the place. And in this tutorial, I'm gonna show you how to animate those. If you wanna support the channel or just check the file for yourself, just head over to my Gumroad page. You'll find the link in the description. So yeah, first we need some text to work with, and for that I went to ChatGPT and I said I need some code used as a graphic element in my video. The code doesn't need to be functional. I want it to look as a virus attack. Then I needed some font, and so this is the one I used. This one is free if you want to download it. Okay, so let's copy the code here, and yeah, just click here, copy the code. Okay, so let's open up Cinema, and here we want some text. Be sure to use this one and not the text spline. I'm gonna paste the code here. So I want the depth to be 0. The height here could be 1 centimeter. The height doesn't really matter, but yeah, I'm gonna use this. Okay, so let's go to the filter. I'm just gonna hide the work plane here and maybe the world axis. I also want to remove the little dots here, and those are the handles. Okay, so here we have only the text. So let's select the text and change the font. The horizon here is bugging me as well, so yeah, let's move that. Let's hit Ctrl D, set this to 25 FPS, maybe set that to something longer. I'm gonna hit Shift V, go to the head, and I want the frames per second here. And as you can see, those texts, if they are too long, they may be a bit heavy on the GPU, but never mind. So we're gonna use this as a base. Okay, so next we wanna add a plane effector. We don't want the position, but the visibility here. And then in the text, we want that inside the words tab here. Let's add a field, and you want a linear field here. We want this to be 0.1, and we want this to be y minus. Let's just go to the parameters, and we want the field color to be off. Okay, so if I now move this, I can remove the text. Then I'm gonna control drag this. So this one is gonna be top, and I'm gonna call this one bottom. So let's go to the plane and the fields tab here, and I'm gonna drop the bottom one over here. And I wanna set this one to subtract. So let's hide this now. And if I move the text, you can see that this happens, which is pretty much what we want. Okay, so let's go to the front view. And here we also want to hide the handles. Okay, for the bottom one, I just want to add a little angle. And this could be -1 degree. Okay, so let's hide the plane. And yeah, this is a little more interesting now. So that's the base, and now we want to automate the animation on the text. And to do that, we're going to use some Xpresso. Let's add a new null, and we want to move that inside. I'm going to select the text. I want to add an Xpresso tag to that. I want to drag in the text twice, and we want to move that on the y-axis. So let's get that as an output here and an input for this one. So here I want a math node. I want to connect those. And for input 2, let's add 1. And if I hit play now, the text is scrolling. Maybe I want to uncheck the plane here to see what happens. And now if I hit play, the text is just moving on the y-axis forever. And back to frame 0, I want this to go back to its original position. So for that, I'm gonna need a time node, and I want a compare. And here I want to add a condition. The switch is gonna come from here. So let's connect the text to the first input, and the output of the condition goes into the math node. When I hit play, it's moving, and if I go back to 0, the text is going back to 0 as well. Okay, and maybe we want to connect that here instead and connect the add here. So this is going to give us the same result, but it's going to be easier later on to set an initial position here for the text. I'm just going to add a remark. This is going to be frame 0. So this is just to make things easier to understand later on. So now we reset the text when we are back to 0, but I also want to reset that when the y-axis is too high. And to do that, we're gonna need to know the text height. So let's control drag this remark. Here I want to say reset if y is too high. Okay, so let's move that over here, and we're gonna need two more of those. So let's connect the condition to the input here and the output to the text. So we want to get the height of the text. So let's bring in the text here, and we're gonna need some Python node. It's gonna be pretty simple. I'm gonna delete the ports here, and on the text, I want the object, connect the object to the link here. And as an output here, we want a vector. And in the Python node here, I'm gonna delete this. And just after the one, I'm gonna type point get rad. So that's all we need. Let's get a vector to Rails to split this vector, connect that to the input. And just to see if this is working, I'm gonna bring in a plane. Okay, and I'm gonna set the plane to be 1 by 1. I want this to be facing in the Z direction like this. Let's bring that inside the Xpresso. So for this one, we're gonna need the width and the height. We're just gonna connect here and here. So as we are calculating the radius of that, this is only half of the width and the height of the text. So we're gonna add another math node here, connect the X value to the width. I wanna set the math node to be multiplying this by 2. And we're gonna do the same for the height. Okay, so that's much better, but we want this to be just in the same place as the text. So for the plane here, we're gonna need position X and position Y. And we're gonna connect X directly to the X position. For Y, if I connect this directly to the Y position, it's gonna go up and we don't want that. So let's control drag the multiply and connect the Y to the first input. Here we're gonna connect the output and we want to multiply this by -1. Now, if you have a shorter text, if I delete some, this should update, and yeah, pretty nice. So we don't need the plane here, really, just deactivate it. I want to use this radius to drive the reset on the y-axis here. So in this condition, we want to compare the y position of the text. And if this one is bigger than twice the y radius here, we want the position here to get back to 0. Let's just select the text here, and we want this to be a locator, just to see the starting point here. I want this to go back to 0 a little bit sooner, so we always have text. Maybe I want the bottom linear field here, and I want to get the y-axis. For the compare here, I want to add another math node. And I want to add this to the result of the y-axis here. And so that's what we are connecting to the compare now. And if I let this play now, you can see that we are resetting the text just before the end. So now I want to add some controls to that. So let's add a new null. With the null selected, I'm going to add a new user data. I'm going to call this one distance. I want a float slider and reels. I'm going to set this to 0.1 and maximum here will be 10. Default value, I want this to be 0.5. Okay, let's open up the Xpresso. So here we are adding 1 each frame. To control that, we're going to bring in the null and the distance. Let's connect the distance into the second input here. Let's deactivate the plane and hit play. So now we have some control over the speed, but we don't want this to move constantly. We want to add some randomness to that. Let's add another user data here, and I'm gonna call this one modulo. I want this to be an integer, and the interface should be a slider. Let's set this to 10 as well, and the default value here could be 5. So let's go back to the Xpresso and I want to add this modulo to the control. So here we're going to look for a random, another math node here. So let's bring in a result node just to see what we are doing. And here we want a random integer. So let's connect that to the result. And if I hit play, each frame, this gives us a random integer. I want to connect this as an input to the math node, and I'm going to connect the modulo to the second input. I'm going to change the math node from add to modulo. Okay, so this is now modulo 5. If I hit play, it's going to give us random numbers between -4 and 4. So instead of that, we're just going to go to the random here, and we want to check the positive only. And now we only have values from 0 to 4. We want to use that inside the add. So let's move that over here, double click that just to disconnect, move the modulo in the first position here. I'm going to add a compare node here. So if the result of this is equal to 0, we want to trigger a condition. So let's connect that to the switch. So if this is false, it's going to be the first input. We want this to be 0. And if it's true, we want to use the distance here. So let's connect that to the input of the add now. It's no longer moving constantly, but in a more random fashion. So if I select the control null, 0, nothing is moving. The lower the value, the more chance it has to move, and the higher the value, the less likely it's going to move up. Let's move the plane here inside the text, and I just want to show you something. So if I control drag the text here and move this aside like so, the issue here is both texts are exactly the same. The animation is the same. We don't really want that. In fact, we want to have different texts with different animations. So let's automate that. And if you have a look at the random here, you can use a random seed here. And for the random seed, we're going to use the text position. So let's bring in the null here, and we want position X, Y, and Z. And to get a different number, depending on the position, we're just going to add those together. So let's add a new math node. I'm going to add X and Y, control drag this one, and I'm going to add the result of that with position Z. So depending on the text position here, we're going to have a different result here. And this is exactly what we need for the random seed. So let's control drag the text again and move that over here. If I duplicate the text now and hit play, you can see that those animations are not synchronized anymore. The only thing we want to change now is if I go back to 0, both texts are starting from the same position, and we want to add some randomness to that as well. Okay, so let me just delete the text here, and we're going to go back to the Xpresso of the first one. This condition here is defining the starting Y position of the text when we are at frame 0. So we want to add another input here, and we want to base this from the number generated here. Let's move that down like so. Let's add an absolute node just to make sure the result here is always positive. We're gonna control drag the modulo here, connect that as an input, and the output should go into the input of the condition here. And we're gonna need the height of the text. So we already know the height of the text. We calculated that using the Python node here, and we're gonna connect this to the second input of the modulo. And the output of that is always going to be a value between 0 and the full height of the text. So every time I control drag another text, it's going to have its own animation, and I still can control every text with those two sliders here. So this is going to be pretty convenient. All right, and we want to connect this modulo to the second condition as well. I just want to change the locator here to a cube. Make this 1 centimeter. So now when I want to copy this text, I just going to control drag the cube here. This way I'm going to copy the whole setup. Okay, so let's go to the perspective view just for a moment. If I duplicate the text a few times, the FPS is dropping quite drastically and it's going to be really difficult to work like that. A good thing would be to have like a proxy box around that just to see which space is going to be occupied by the text. So we already have something like that, and this is the plane here. So let's add a display tag to that and set this to line. Let's open up the Xpresso. And so here for the height, we don't want to use the text height, but we want to use the linear field position here. If we connect that directly to the height, it's just giving us this line. And this is because we have a negative value here. So let's search for an absolute. Okay, and then we're gonna connect that and connect the output to the height. Okay, so that's much better. And for the Y position, we wanna use the math node here. We're gonna connect the absolute to the input. And here, instead of -1, we wanna set this to -0.5. So here we have the bounding box. So if I hit play, the issue is the bounding box is gonna update depending on the text that's visible. So the thing here is I always want the maximum width of the text. So instead of the visibility here, we're gonna use the scale. So I'm gonna set this to a uniform scale, -1. The top field, I'm gonna set this to +y. And then here for the bottom one, I'm gonna set this to add. And we don't want this to affect the text directly. So let's go to the words here and delete the plane. Then in the plane here, we want to go to the deformers and set this to object. Okay, so now the bounding box stays the same. The only thing is sometimes you have stuff like that happening, and to avoid that, we're just gonna go to the linear field here, go to remapping and set the inner offset to 100. And same for the bottom one here. I'm just gonna change this to 1 and maybe 1 here. Okay, and here now we have the bounding box that stays in place, and that's exactly what we want. The last thing we want to do is we want to have a checkbox here to switch from the text to the plane. So I'm simply gonna add a new user data here. I'm gonna call this one proxy, and I want this to be Boolean. So yeah, here we have a little checkbox that you can use. I'm just gonna add that to the control here. I'm gonna import the plane and the text. So here we're gonna need the enable, and for the text, we're gonna import the enable as well. So when the proxy is on, we wanna enable the plane. Here I'm gonna add a math node, and input 1 should be 1. And we want to subtract the value from the proxy here. And I'm gonna then connect that to the enable from the text. And just to explain what I'm doing here, I'm gonna connect the proxy to a result and the output of the subtract to a second result. And when I go to the control, so here proxy is unchecked, so this one is 0 and this one is 1. If I check the proxy, you can see that this becomes 1 and this becomes 0. Okay, let's go back to 0 and uncheck the proxy. Okay, here we have the text. If I check the proxy, we have the plane, but when I click the viewport, the plane becomes just a line. And the reason is this is updating every frame. And right now the text is unchecked, so the width here will be 0 because we have no text. So the only thing we have to do is bring in the text, and you want to check that this is enabled. So let's connect that to on. So what this does is when the text is enabled, we allow the plane to update. And if the text doesn't exist, this update doesn't happen. Let's check that. So here we have the text. Let's click the proxy. Here we have the plane. Okay, and so this is working properly. Let me just go to the control and check the proxy for the distance. I'm going to set this to 0.5. And here the modulo, I'm going to set this to 5. Okay, I'm okay with that. So let's go back to proxy mode. I'm going to select the text and I want to duplicate this a few times. And as you can see in proxy mode, we still have a pretty decent FPS. But if I go back to frame 0 here, select the control null and uncheck the proxy, it's going to take some time to update. But here you can see that all the texts are the same. Just click the viewport and you should be good to go. All right, so just a couple of tweaks I'd like to add here. So let's hit Alt G here and drop the text inside a null. Let's go to the control and activate the proxy. Make a copy of the text. So let's say you want to group those texts and you want to use that in different objects like screens or something like that. Let's show the text again. Let me just click the viewport to update. And as you can see, those texts are the same. So this is because we are using local positions. And so here, instead of using those, I just want to get the global position instead. I'm going to add a vector to Reels, connect that, and connect that back to the add nodes. Okay, so this should get rid of that problem. Something else is when I, for example, move the text here until the end here, for example, when I hit play, this doesn't move. And this is because we are already at the end of the text. Let's uncheck the plane. As a starting position, we never want to be as low in the text as that. So what we want to do is we want to add something after the modulo. So yeah, simply add a math node, connect the modulo. Let's make this smaller. And here we could simply divide by 2, for example, and then connect that back to the conditions. So this way we always have text left for the animation. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.